Alright, hey guys, today we're going to go over a few different things regarding the Ilium. This is technically going to be your fundamentals video if you were going to be in person in the Gonstead Club. So again, today we're going to be going over Ilium misalignments, as well as patient positioning, and then static and motion palpation. My name is Rachel, and I'm an officer here in the Gonstead Club, and I'm currently a quarter 9.
Hi, my name is Chris, and I am also in quarter 9, and I'm a Gonstead officer as well. So first, what we're going to talk about is we're going to quickly recap the Gonstead system. We have 5 key components to the Gonstead system. The first one is visualization. When people ask me to explain visualization, I explain that I want to see the tissue and I want to see the tissues around anything that I'm about to treat. So that's why I use visualization, and also can help you find sudoriferous changes, physical changes on the skin to help you find the specific subluxation that you're supposed to adjust. The next is static palpation. Static palpation, we're statically going down the spine, feeling for any edema, any tight and tender fibers, any hypertonicity of the muscles, anything like that. And now our motion of palpation. The motion palpation is basically the blueprint of our adjustment. So when we're motion palpating, we are actually finding the exact position where that bone is misaligned. So when we do make that adjustment, it can be in the exact vector that we need to do. So the next thing that we do is we use a scope. The scope reading is basically helps us find where we need to adjust. It doesn't tell us how to adjust it. It just tells us where there is nerve interference in a sense. So what we basically do is we run it down the spine, and it's basically picking up nerve interference on these spinal nerves that are outside here. And it's a very good tool to help us locate the specific place where we need to make those adjustments. And also, a big thing about this, it can tell us when to adjust and when not to adjust. The next thing that we do, and we can see Clarence Gonstead doing it as well with his scope in hand, is we do x-ray analysis. X-ray analysis is such a big part of our technique. It's just as big as the other 5 components, and so important because we need to be able to biomechanically look at someone's spine and confidently make an adjustment that we know is going to be specific and the right adjustment for that person to fix whatever issue or problem that they have. Okay, so now that we've explained the Gonstead system a little bit more in detail, now we're going to talk about the Ilium misalignments. First thing, for those younger quarters, I think that this is a very good tool to be able to use, is unscrewing your pelvis. I think quarter 3 or quarter 2, I unscrewed my pelvis because Dr. Meisel said that if you don't know the sacroiliac joint by heart, you'll never be a master at adjusting it. So I unscrewed it, and I am now looking at it now, and I've been looking at it for a really long time. I actually keep this unscrewed all the time. And look at the angle of the joint, look at the articulation of the joint. Just make sure you know that joint inside and out. So now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about listings. So the 4 listings that I'm going to talk about, well, more than 4 listings, we have PIs, ASs. So PI stands for posterior inferior, and the reference point we're talking about is the posterior superior iliac spine that is right here. Basically those little dimples that you see on the back when someone's sitting. So we have posterior inferior, we have anterior superior, we have internally rotated, and we have externally rotated. So let's talk about the PI first. So a regular ilium like this, okay? So when it drops PI, our posterior iliac spine that's right here has dropped posterior and inferior. So do you see how that rocks posterior and inferior? So just from the side, look at the biomechanics of that. The ilium is rocking posterior and inferior. Our next listing is AS. AS is anterior superior. So it's rocking anterior and superior. Anterior and superior. That's from the side. So with these listings, I want to make everybody sure it's, when we're looking at the ilium, it's not like it's rocking posterior, inferior, anterior, superior. It more rocks posterior, inferior, anterior, superior, okay? I want you to understand these are not 2-dimensional motions, these are 3-dimensional motions. So now that we have anterior, superior, and posterior, inferior, we're going to just talk about EXs and INs. So when you have an EX and an IN, the EX is going to look like this, come out, and the IN is going to be like this. And if you noticed, when I did it, it wasn't just like this. It rides An EX, when it misaligns, goes down the joint and goes out. And an IN rides up the joint and comes in. Okay, so we have PI, we have AS, we have EX, and we have IN. And now these are, the ilium is not gonna move this much at all. This is just easy for you to learn and just see how it moves and stuff like that. The ilium is going to move millimeters, your adjustment is going to be small and minimal and specific. So next thing we're gonna talk about is married and divorced listings. So married listings basically mean that the ilium is going in the same direction. The misalignments go in the same direction. So the two married listings that we have is ASIN and PIEX. So let me explain those right now. So with a PI, we knew it said posterior and inferior, so it's gonna rock posterior and inferior. When a PI rocks posterior and inferior, it also goes posterior and inferior and externally rotates a little bit, okay? Can you kind of see that? I'm not mimicking, I'm mimicking the joint. So when it rocks posterior, inferior, it externally rotates. So for example, this would be a PIEX and it would be married together. And basically if we wanted to correct it, we would go inferior to superior and then external to internal to correct it this way, okay? So now for an ASIN, when the ilium rides up the sacroiliac joint, it goes AS and then internally rotates the IN. So that's what we call the married listings. They're going in the same direction. And for us to correct that, we're going from superior to inferior, internal to external, okay? So now that we have those are the easy listings, those are married. So now we have divorce listings as well that go in opposite direction, and these can get a little tricky. So the first one that we're gonna talk about is a PIIN. So for example, we talked about earlier with a PI, we're talking about the posterior superior iliac spine that is dropping PI, okay? And then for this one, instead of going EX this way, it's going to go PIIN, okay? So PI and then internally rotating at that superior iliac spine. So the next one that we're gonna go is ASEX. So for an ASEX, remember earlier it rides up the joint, so it's gonna ride up the joint, but now externally rotate this way, okay? So real quickly, a little bit about that. I just wanna kind of refer to the notes real quick. So on x-ray, we talk about all these different misalignments all the time, but we want to relate them, we're motion palpating here, but we also want to relate them to the actual x-ray as well. So with a PI, it's going to be an increased innominate measurement. So the innominate, when we look at the x-ray right here, this is going to be the innominate real quick. So if you think about it, when it rocks PI, it's actually going to look longer on the x-ray because of basically the reflection. And with an AX, the innominate's going to look a little bit shorter because it's riding up the joint and making it shorter. And all of this stuff is just, this is a fundamentals club, but I want to just put it out there so you guys can get those wheels turning in your head. So AS, shorter innominate, PI, longer innominate. And then we talked about married listings before, so EX, more of a longer innominate, IN, more of a shorter innominate. So kind of those are just, and we also talk about the obturator as well, but just, I want to give you just a little bit of tidbit information just to give you some reference when we talk about x-rays later.
Okay, now that Chris went ahead and went through all the misalignments, I'm going to start talking a little bit more about visualization and what we're going to be looking for on the patient to kind of try to put other pieces together and see how his ilium and pelvis might be misaligned. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to be getting, Nelly girl, close and personal a little bit, but just kind of walk them through what you're doing. So first off, I'm going to actually take my fingers and I'm going to kind of scoop up under his glutes because I'm going to want to contact the base of the ischial tuberosity to see, kind of gauge which one is higher or lower, and that's going to kind of give me an idea of what side might be the PI side versus the AS side. So like I said, I'm going to take my fingers, I'm going to go ahead and touch your glutes, come up under, and you're gonna, when you come in, you're gonna scoop up because you really wanna make sure you're touching the base of that ischial tuberosity. So you're gonna come in, lift up, and I know you can't see my fingers very well, but here on his right side, my finger's just a little bit higher. So I'm thinking that his right side might have moved AS, anterior superior, and his left side might have moved PI. So now that I'm kind of thinking that, in order to see if he might have an EX or an IN misalignment, I'm going to come up here and look at the gluteal contour. So I know, again, it's hard to see, but when I'm looking at a patient, I'm going to actually want to be up here looking down the patient so that I can see the top of the glutes and which one looks more wide, and then which one looks a little bit more peaked or bunched together. So when you do that, if you do see here, you're gonna look just at the base or the top right here. So if you see that one side looks a little bit more bunched together, we're thinking that that's gonna be the EX side. And then if the other side's a little flatter, we're thinking that that is where the ilium has moved IN. So here, I'm actually gonna kind of over exaggerate and just grab where I'm gonna be looking to kind of give you an idea of where you wanna look on the patient. So here, I'm gonna tuck your shirt just a little bit. So we're gonna be looking right here. So actually for him, he's a little bit more flat here versus a little bit more peaked on this side. So now I'm gonna put those pieces of information together that I just visualized. And so based on this, I was thinking this is an AS, and he's a little bit more flat. So I'm thinking AS, IN. So then we can assume and say that the other side is gonna be a PIEX. Another thing that we can do visually, turn around for me, is when a patient comes in, foot flare will tell you a lot. So basically you're gonna look at his toes. So if his toes, if one side is pointing outwards, we're thinking that that ilium has moved IN, if you can see how that works. So as the ilium's gonna, I'll have you turn around again. As the ilium moves inward, his toe is gonna naturally come out with him. So if we see a toe out, we're thinking IN. If we see the toes pointed in, we're thinking EX, because as the ilium is gonna move outward like that, it's gonna bring the toe in and around. All right, now that we already went through how the pelvis is gonna misalign, or the ilium is gonna misalign, as well as our visualization, we're gonna go ahead and move into the next part of our analysis, which is gonna be the static palpation. So just a reminder, I know we're throwing a lot at you, but we did go ahead and post those sheets. So everything that we're talking about is actually gonna be on those sheets and in more detail if you need to go back. So we're gonna talk about, again, static palpation. So I'm gonna show you on the model and then move over to Chris, just to give you a good visualization of what we're looking for. So with the ilium misalignment, again, we're gonna be looking for edema on our patient. So how that's gonna appear is, here, can you just hold it? There we go. So when the ilium misaligns, if it's gonna go PI and rock downwards, that's gonna create this gap at the top of the joint. So that's where all of your edema, since you have that space, is gonna pool. So when you're looking at the PSIS on the patient, any edema that you're gonna see is gonna be at the posterior superior aspect of the joint, or sitting up in here. If our ilium is gonna rock AS, anterior superior, it's gonna create that gapping area at the base of the joint. And so due to that space being open, any edema is gonna pool down there. So you'll see it at the posterior inferior aspect of the joint. Then the next thing that we have is an EX listing. Again, you're not gonna have this exaggerated movement. I'm just really gonna show you so you can get a good visualization. So if your ilium went EX, you're gonna have edema around the entire joint space. And then IN, it's a little hit or miss, but you could have some tenderness and maybe some edema, but it's actually gonna be on the front of the patient. So now that we've showed you on the model, I'm gonna have Chris sit down.
And one more thing that I'd like to say, Rachel did a good job. You know, when we're talking about edema, seeing it, it's also, you know, we're statically palpation. This is non-movement palpation. This is us almost rubbing our fingers down the spine to feel actually what the spine's doing without putting motion into it. And when we say edema, there's also going to be usual pain and tenderness at the top or the bottom of the joints, or the whole joint.
Yeah, so good point.